Hi, I'm John D'Amico, and this is Edgar Ulmer's 1960 film, The Amazing Transparent Man. Roger Ebert died today, and I thought there was no better tribute for the man who taught us to love movies than to talk about a movie I love. And The Amazing Transparent Man is a movie very few people love. It came and went in 1960 with hardly a word of press about it. It now has, if anything, its reputation has diminished over time. It has a 3.4 on IMDb. The critic David Sindler called it dull and implausible, and Gary Tooze said that it only shows the depths to which the medium could sink, and that's not unusual. Those are pretty standard reviews for this film. It was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in their 6th season in 1995, and they put the film about as well as anybody has. They panned it with the phrase, an inhospitable film. That was their word, I never forgot it. They called this movie inhospitable. And they're right, it very much is an inhospitable film. It's a movie about disloyal people in a tawdry, terrible little world. And that's why I love it. We begin here with a film noir-inspired prison break that's over almost before it begins, but it's appropriate that for no matter how short, we start with film noir, because Edgar Ulmer, the director, is best known for his 1945 seminal film noir film Detour. And here we cut abruptly to this chase through the swamp, which again is very abrupt and over almost before it starts, but it has a Universal Studios 1930s horror flavor. There's a shot coming up that's almost verbatim out of The Wolfman, and it's appropriate that we go from film noir to Universal horror. See, this is it. That's right out of The Wolfman. Because other than Detour, Ulmer is known for his 1934 film noir, Universal horror film, The Black Cat, which was the first union between Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, and Boris Karloff, who played Frankenstein. And The Black Cat was a very well-received film when it came out in '34. It was Ulmer's first American directorial debut, except for one little industrial film about VD that was really more of a pay-for-hire kind of hack job. The Black Cat was the first true expression of Edgar Ulmer. In Europe, he came from Austria-Hungary, and he directed one film there called People on Sunday in 1930, but he co-directed it with Fred Zinnemann, who went on to do High Noon, and the Siodmak brothers, who went on to The Wolfman and a bunch of other stuff, and even Billy Wilder even wrote that. So People on Sunday is not really an Edgar Ulmer film. It's a melange of great European artists. The Black Cat was the first true Edgar Ulmer film. And it was very well received, and it promised a great career for the man. It was beautiful, elegant, smart, very, very dark, tortured film about European emigres to America. And he should have gone on to have the kind of career that, say, James Whale did, you know, or Jack Arnold, where they were just cranking out these pretty decently budgeted movies for the major studios every year. But he didn't. The Black Cat was his last high-budget film, because in the production of the film, Edgar Ulmer met this woman, Shirley Kasler, who was married to Max Alexander, who was a film producer and the nephew of Carl Laemmle, the head of Universal Studios. Universal was the studio that produced The Black Cat. Now, Shirley Kasler and Edgar Ulmer fell in love, and she became Shirley Ulmer. And Carl Laemmle never forgave Edgar Ulmer for stealing his nephew's wife, and he was immediately blackballed from major studio production. And he had to find work in what was then called Poverty Row, which were the smaller, fly-by-night kind of studios in the California area. And he got work. He was making films in Yiddish. He made a series of 4 films in Yiddish that were very good, actually, in the late 30s. And he found his niche, kind of, in film noir at a company called PRC in the 40s. That was where Detour came in. And Detour is seminal 1945 film noir 68 minutes long about just the darkest, meanest, purest film noir you can imagine. A hypnotic film, and it showed what a great artist could do on a limited budget. But the real hook of film noir was that it was just unabidingly cruel. It was a mean film. And so is this.
Keep him around here to scare off.
And it's not a campy science fiction film, it's a dark science fiction film. And I think nobody quite knows what to do with old, dark science fiction films anymore. There's sort of a canon, and if you're not in the canon, you're only treated with ridicule. But there's a lot of artistry in this film, and I think it's worth talking about. There's a shot coming up that it's what caught my attention in this film and what made me really look at it. This shot right here. It reminds me of nothing more than the shot in Psycho of the Bates Manor rising up over the flat, utilitarian Bates Motel. And there's a lot of interplay in that shot between the old and the new and the beautiful and the tawdry, and it's interplay that's very important in Psycho, and it's an interplay that's very important in this film, which is also a 1960 film. 1960 was an important year in film. It was a defining year in a way that very few years are for film, because of Psycho and because of Breathless, Godard's Breathless. Those two films changed the whole way we make film. They were the first really successful films to presume that the audience understood the grammar of filmmaking. Breathless broke the realism of its scenes by having jump cuts in the middle where they would just pull boring moments out of a scene and cut you immediately past them. And Psycho pulls the rug out of you 20 minutes in by killing the lead and leaving you dangling. And they both have this sort of violent sexuality where they're examining the interplay between violence and sexuality and cinema, and so does this film. This film is just as self-reflexive as the two of them. And it's as much of a piece of post-New Wave dark artistry as either of them are, but because it's a low-budget science fiction film, nobody at the time, and nobody still to this day, seems to be able to accept that. Nobody knows what to do with it. You can't really laugh at this movie. I mean, look at this scene right here. We have the hero and the villain, and they're just both the meanest, cruelest humans. Even the ad campaign did not know whether to play Joey Faust here. You see, he's pushing this guy around. They didn't know whether to play him as a hero or a villain. And that's because this film doesn't really have a hero. It has a series of characters of various degrees of criminality who all use each other. And that was a defining element of the films of Edgar Ulmer. If Hitchcock was the master of suspense, Ulmer was the master of regret. And there's a real, just a dark fear of human nature in his films, and that's never more apparent than in this film and its sister film, Beyond the Time Buried, which is the other film he made in 1960, his other science fiction film. The two of them have this really dark, apocalyptic look at human nature, and I think it's something that's aged very well. See, watch this man coming up here. He's playing Julian.
You know what one of these bullets will do, son? It'll rip out your spine and roll it up like a ball of string.
That line right there may be the cruelest thing I've ever heard anybody say in a film. It gets you in the spine, that line.
I understand there's a reward of $5,000.
And there's a rawness to this film that it comes through in the making of the film. The man holding the shotgun there, he's a stuntman. And just to make a little extra cash while they were making this film, he plays Douglas Kennedy there as stunt double. I mean, it was that kind of low-budget filmmaking where it was very tight-knit, and they had to make do with what they had. And you'll see this set coming up, and it's a set made of convenience. It's a set that they just did the best they could with, but it has this very cloistered, you see there's sheet metal, this is the lab, there's like sheet metal and just cold metal that doesn't seem to do anything everywhere.
As you can see, this is quite a serious
it's
business.
functional, but it also speaks to the darkness at the core of this film. There's a stripped down coldness to the world of man in this movie, and it plays well with the world of nature in this film, which is always sort of expansive. There's almost a Western influence to the panoramas of like driving and just the exteriors. There's almost a Western look to them. There's a landscape that you can explore, but these sets, they're tight and they're close and there's small windows blocked up with lead. And there's no escape for you in this movie. It's a movie that does not promise you an out. Now, this scene is the scene where they sort of explain the plot. And it reminds me of the Terminator. I mean, it's just a one-shot, 12 minutes or something into this movie, boom. He drops him down. We never get the background on how they broke him out of prison, just they did.
I agreed to do your dirty work.
And we see the plot is there's a jewel thief safecracker guy, and they're going to turn him invisible and make him steal nuclear material, and that's it. That's all you get. 12 minutes in. It's really efficient. It reminds me of the Terminator or something, where you just get sort of one burst of exposition and then you go on from there. And that kind of efficiency was, you're not born with that in filmmaking. You learn it, and Ulmer learned it through his work in Poverty Row. This was his second to last film, and he had a total of 48 films at least. It may be more than 48 because he didn't get credit on some of them. I've heard talk that there's a few westerns he did in the 30s that nobody really knows what he did. But he had just a long career of short time frames and quick movies. This movie is 60 minutes long, 57 minutes long. I mean, it's practically a short film. But you learn this efficiency through doing it. And here he had, I think, 45, 46 movies under his belt. That's more than triple the entire output of Stanley Kubrick and almost 7 times the output to date of Quentin Tarantino. So, even if you don't like this movie, I think there's a lot to be learned from the sheer fact of its existence. This is not a film that should exist. You shouldn't be able to make a film of competency in this short of a time frame and in this short of a budget. We have here, he's strapping this hamster down and he's about to turn it invisible. And this shot coming up is a direct quotation, I think it's actually stock footage, from 1940's The Invisible Man Returns with Vincent Price, which was the second of like 5 Invisible Man movies Universal made, and it's a typical Universal Studios Invisible Man movie in that it's tragicomic. And it's really good, actually. I really like The Invisible Man Returns. But there's moments where it's just sort of pathetic. And the whole conceit of the Universal Invisible Man movies is that it's difficult to turn visible again. So those movies are all about a man who turns invisible and he goes crazy because you never see him again, which speaks to some, like, that's a deep, dark, modernist fear. But Ulmer turns that on its head here. This film, which was, I believe, the first post-Sputnik, post-Cuban Missile Crisis, like deep into the Cold War Invisible Man film. In this film, it's pretty hard to turn things invisible. You need these layers of lead shielding, and you'll find out later that actually just by being in the room watching this, they've all been irradiated and they're all dying. This is killing them all. But it's really easy to turn visible again. It's problematically easy. The tension in this film comes from the fact that in the middle of robberies and stuff, this poor guy, Joey Faust, will just burst back into visibility. And that has kind of the same tragicomic element of the Universal films, but by turning it around, there's kind of a whole different take on what it means to be invisible and what the dangers are. Invisibility is not a bad condition to be in this film. Visibility is the problem, because human relations in this film are dangerous, and they're dangerous in almost all of Ulmer's films. You know, you look at Detour. I mean, that's a movie simply about how hard it is just to live. There's a moment in Detour, the inciting event of that film is the death of a man in his car.
No doubt.
And it's presumed a murder, but it's probably not. And what happens is somebody just dies, and there's a poor guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's the line is, fate could put the finger on you or me anytime it wants. And that's the defining philosophical undercurrent of Detour, and it's the defining philosophical undercurrent of this film. It begins with that prison break that you don't see in action, and he doesn't ask for it. When he was talking in that car, I don't know if you caught it, he says that he doesn't know who broke him out. Basically, it was just fate, and his experience chose him and said, this is going to happen to you. We're gonna take you out, and we're going to change your life completely and irrevocably, and it's going to cause your death, and it's going to cause all this terrible stuff, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way out. There's no way out for anybody in this movie, because human interaction is dangerous in this movie and in the works of Edgar Ulmer. And that's the kind of philosophy I think you can only really get with the kind of broken heart that he experienced with what happened to him in his career on The Black Cat. And what happened to him and his nation in Germany during and after World War II. There's a World War II aspect to this film, and really to his life. He was part of that group that fled Europe right before the war, but you know, their home was never the same. And this doctor here, this European doctor, who's this sort of a sad old man with his daughter in dire straits. He's in a very obvious Edgar Ulmer stand-in. He's a man between a rock and a hard place. He's a man who's literally trapped in this lab, which is like in the attic of this building. It makes no sense for it to be in the attic, first of all, and there's almost no precedent for that. All these labs you see are in basements, but here in this attic, it feels like he's like Rapunzel. You know, there's nobody coming to save him, and he's just trapped. He's trapped because he's visible, and he's a target. And he has a daughter, and he loves her, and that makes him a target. And it's the same with Julian. You find out that it was the same sort of deal with him. He had a daughter, and he loved her, and that's why now he's this shriveled, bad man. And he's the worst of all of them. That line about rolling up your spine, I mean, that's scary stuff. So there's an undercurrent in this film, I think, that there really are bad people. There are people who are driven to bad things, but once you're on that path, you're on that path. There's no way out. Even his lighter films, you look at something like The Naked Dawn, which is a very lovely, romantic love triangle kind of film. It was, Truffaut really loved it. The French New Wave guys loved Ulmer, which is why I think it's appropriate to look at this film in contention with Breathless. Because what Godard was doing in Breathless, he learned in part from the films of Ulmer. He learned that from Detour, he learned that from Tomorrow We Live, and he learned it from The Naked Dawn, which was the movie that gave Francois Truffaut the confidence to make Jules and Jim. Now, Truffaut says about The Naked Dawn that we can see Ulmer behind every image and we can feel him intimately. That's a line from his book, The Films of My Life, which is a really good book if you haven't read it. He describes it as a movie made with joy that shows a love of the cinema. And he describes it as a movie that's soft-hearted. A movie about the virtues of love And that's true. So are his Yiddish films, and so is The Black Cat. And even so is Detour. I mean, the defining instance of Detour is a man travels west to find the woman he loves. Now, in all of these films, people are destroyed by their love. They're destroyed by their loyalty. So, as this film goes, Amazing Transparent Man, sorry for that digression into his other films, but as Amazing Transparent Man goes, more and more disloyalty seems to brim. There's a line later when you'll meet the sort of supposed love interest to this film, who really isn't, but she's played as one. Their big moment, the big love scene is the two of them in a car, and Faust here, he throws her out of the car, and he tells her that he needs the car more than he needs her. And Faust gets by because of his cold brutality. Faust, who's our hero, is a terrible human being. But he wins. I mean, as far as anybody does, nobody wins in the end. But he goes the distance. And he goes the distance when he shuts down and when he shuts people out. I think he's like the only character in the film without really a major emotional attachment to anybody. So it's almost an inversion of every other movie. Because the villains are all people who love and have loved, and the supposed hero, is one who doesn't. And that's why I think people really are bothered by this movie. Because it has hard things to say about the world. It doesn't give us much hope. This is a movie that tells us our choices are to love or not love, and if we love, we'll be destroyed, and if we don't love, we will destroy. That's a hard lesson, but I think it's a valid worldview, particularly for the life Ulmer led.
What is it you want up here?
Take it easy, Doc. Came up to see you.
I'd like to take this moment now to talk about some of the other people who made this film, because they're worth mentioning too, and
Some answers.
as the film heats up, I'm really not going to get a chance to talk about any of them. This was written by a man named Jack Lewis, who was he was a stuntman. He's a stuntman for John Ford, actually, among others. He's a stuntman on Mr. Roberts, The Horse Soldiers, and on Sergeant Rutledge, which was another great film of 1960 that was all about perception and the cold things we can do to each other. Jack Lewis was a Korean War veteran. He was a private eye. He was a horse wrangler. He was the creator and editor of Gun World magazine. So he was not a sentimentalist either. He was a man who was able to match Ulmer's pessimism. And he was able to match Ulmer's
My wife had died of experiments. I had been
Ulmer's fears. Because I think really the only way you can become a gun magazine editor is if you're kind of afraid of the people around you. And I think that comes through in this. There's a lack of trust in this movie that defines it. The director of photography in this film was Meredith Nicholson, who went on to be the DP for Batman and Get Smart. And there's a similar style in that. This movie rarely gets credit, even for Ulmer fans, for its visual style. Beyond the Time Barrier, its sister film has a much more blatant visual style. It's much more noticeably beautiful, but I think there's quiet grace in this. You saw when the hamster disappeared, it was almost like a moment of pop art. It was like Picasso stripping things down. It became flesh, then skeleton, then gone. And it's similarly with this set. There's really no lab equipment here. It's just metal. So there's kind of there's a pop art feel to this that'll become more and more apparent as Faust becomes invisible. You'll see shots of him where it's just a floating head in a bank, and they're fun, but they're almost absurdist, and
Quite a little
they're darkly absurd. See, here we have... Good, I'm glad she showed up. I wanted to talk about her. This is the love interest I was mentioning. She was kind of I forget her name, and I feel really bad about forgetting her name. She was a sort of standby actress. Marguerite Chapman, that's her name. She's first billed. She's billed above him because she was a common B-movie leading lady in the 40s and into the 50s. But this film is in 1960, and you can see she's quite beautiful, but you can feel age creeping in on her, and you can feel a sort of desperation in her that'll come out in the romance scenes between her and the bad guy. A desperate desire to be loved and just being shut down by everybody around her, which I think it speaks to an aging actress who never quite got success enough to be comfortable. And there's a lot of that kind of an interplay between life and art in the films of Ulmer. You can feel sort of the personalities of these people seeping into the film. Like Julian, I mean, he looks like he walked off of a cowboy set, which he did. I was talking about the Western influence of the exteriors, but it's also in Julian's mustache.
Now, splitting the take of a few of those would pay you a lot more than Krenner will ever give you.
Meredith Nicholson, his camera is interesting in this film. There's a lot of these long, money-saving two-shot takes during the conversations, but when things start to heat up and Faust goes invisible, he starts to play with the camera a lot. This is something that's a tradition in Invisible Man movies. I mean, there's a shot in James Whale's Invisible Man, I'll never forget. It's one of my favorite shots where the camera is tracking footprints appearing in the snow, and they're the Invisible Man's footprints, and the camera is tracking them, and for just a second, the camera drifts the wrong way, and the tracks go the other way, right before it cuts back.
Keep quiet about this, Julian.
And
Keep quiet and I'll help you.
it feels like a moment where James Whale, the director of that film, is
We've got to help each other now.
is tricking us. It's a false point of view shot. We're not really tracking the footprints. We're tracking... We're a camera unmoored for a second. On Dangerous Ground, Nicholas Ray, incidentally, is a good comparison with Ulmer, because they both have a similar pop art kind of eye. In Nicholas Ray's On Dangerous Ground, there's a moment where two people walk into a room and they're talking to a woman who they find out in the course of the scene is blind. And the camera pulls in, and we realize, it's hard to explain, but the blind woman looks at us and then turns away, and the camera moves, and we realize she was not looking at one of the characters. The camera was positioned in front of her eye line to trick us into thinking it was a point of view shot. Now that's the kind of stuff that would become very popular in the French New Wave. If you look at, say, Cleo from 5 to 7, Agnes Varda's debut, there's moments where somebody will sing and the camera will sway with the music. There's moments where the camera becomes a character and it becomes an extension of the director, and the camera is able to fool us. Psycho has some of this too. That long pan around the bathroom after Marion Crane dies, where it lands on the money. You see what I mean about the desperation in their romance?
Don't even think about it.
Anyway, the pan in the bathroom, Marion Crane going to the money, where it lands on the money for a second and we think, oh, this is where the plot is going, and then it pulls up and it focuses on Mother, and we realize that Marion Crane's money is not a factor in the plot. That was another instance of the camera tricking us. And that was something that you didn't really see much until films like Psycho and like Breathless and like The Amazing Transparent Man broke down that barrier. Now there's a major shot when Faust first turns invisible, where Krenner here, who just walked off, yeah, it's this scene coming up. Krenner's gonna walk off, and he's gonna walk in front of the camera, and he's gonna talk to the camera, and then the camera's gonna move, and we realize it was not a point of view shot. We weren't Faust. It's a disorienting, almost offhand trick. And that's an important aspect to the film, that we can't even really trust the cameraman.
Doctor, we don't have all night.
Because people lie in this movie. The camera lies. They all lie to each other. The doctor's lying to them. Julian's lying. They're lying and they're using each other. And frankly, I'm glad this movie is only 57 minutes long, because the depths of its mistrust is almost exhausting within 57 minutes. So here we have this is a great shot. That's right out of The Man Escaped, the Robert Bresson minimalist film about a Nazi prison escape. That shot of the two of them, and it's just faces in a tiny hole. And that, you know, the whole film feels like that shot. Look at this stuff. There's just junk closing in on us. This isn't like Frankenstein where the lab equipment is buzzing and making all these cool. I mean, like kind of. There's a little bit of buzzing, but it's not big and grand. It's just clutters of just junk everywhere closing in on us. See what I mean? There's a pop arty, like the clothes are being eaten away. There's an almost self-conscious, artistic, non-realist look to that. There's a lack of realism in the transformation. And there's a lack of realism, frankly, in the story to this film. There's a lot of moments that people will call plot holes. I don't think they're plot holes. I think they're not concerns of the plot. You know? Why don't they go to the cops? Why doesn't Faust, when he's invisible, just run away? Well, because that's not a movie. And also because Faust is bad. He's a bad... See, here we go. This...
Faust, he's here.
We got they're being hit, and we get, like, kind of a sense of where he is. Frankly, it's really cheap. There's poor acting in this part. But it works in a sort of expressionist way. But here we go. There's this shot, and it gives us a clear geographical sense of where Faust is. And now we pull in, and he looks at us, and we're occupying the space where Faust should be. The camera should be Faust right now. That's a shot that worked its way into him. See, it's even tightening in on him as he threatens. The camera has now assumed Faust's point of view, right? You know, it's face to face, it's a frontal argument. But watch what happens.
Shall we talk it over in private? Downstairs? Over here, Major. I'm waiting.
The door opens.
After you, Major.
It wasn't a point of view shot. Or if it was a point of view shot briefly. Faust assumed the camera and then left the camera. So then what the authorship of that shot is odd.
Don't think 1,000 is enough.
That's it's disorienting, isn't it? It should be disorienting. It's meant to disorient us, but it's the kind of thing that I think puts people off a movie like this. I think a low-budget science fiction movie from this era, you have certain expectations, and they're not for quality. You have expectations for goofiness and big monsters and stuff. But when you replace that with a post-New Wave sense of the possibilities of the camera. See, there it goes again. That was a second in a row shot that wasn't a point of view shot, became a point of view shot, waited just long enough for us to accept it as a point of view shot, and then disoriented us and pulled the rug away from us by background action revealing that the Invisible Man was not where we thought he was either. Which makes, actually, Faust pretty threatening in that moment. That's Blue from Old School. Now, mark that false point of view stuff, because that's going to come back at the end. There's a presumption of stupidity on the parts of films of this scale, which, I mean, like, you can almost appreciate it. You watch a scene like this coming up, and it's all very goofy and sort of perfunctory, but I think in this case, and I don't want to just project quality onto this whole film because I'm interested in it, but I think in this case, the major action scene of this film now is coming in, and we're 37 minutes into a 57-minute movie, and it's done in one. You know, you blink and it's done, and I believe that's on purpose. I think that the cruel comedy of this whole situation is pretty intentional and consistent. It's one of the darkest of comedies, but I think the goofiness is sort of there for a reason in this case.
Back in 10 minutes, I gotta check the other post.
This scene is the scene where he steals the fissionable material that the whole thing kind of revolves around. And you'll see now the fissionable material coming out of the vault. The case is in, it's really interesting looking. It's shaped like a bomb, which I think is a very efficient way. See, there it is. It's like a bomb with a handle. And I think that's a really efficient way of pointing to danger without having to give us any more exposition reminding us that they already did, that this is atom bomb stuff. It just, like, that looks like a problem. That looks like something an Invisible Man shouldn't have. And it's framed right in the center there. It's not off to the side, which it should be. He should be walking in the middle of the hallway, but he's not. I always forget this part's even in it. These are like the only other speaking characters you see in the film, and it's kind of interesting that this was probably shot in like an afternoon. And it really speaks to how cloistered this film is, that this is our only real glimpse of the outside world. I think that's a very cinematic thing, and something that you learn from the kind of low-budget filmmaking he learned. So that you just get these shades of the outside world, and you almost don't even want them. This is a film, I think, with a lot of strong visual sense. Sad we're watching it on this print, because there used to be just a flawless print of it on Netflix, but that's gone, so write your congressman, get that back. There's an offhand beauty in it, like the way Ghostbusters has an offhand beauty. And there's a unique point of view in this film, and I think this film was punished for that, because they're not quite sure what to do with it. Now that they have the fissionable material, the bomb stuff in this house, there's this classic old, uniquely American Hopper-esque house that's rigged to blow up. And this is something that came up in The Black Cat in 1934, where he had this beautiful Art Deco mansion that at the end of the film we find out was rigged with dynamite the whole time. And it was a completely modernist, totally cutting edge at the time house that was basically built on an untenable foundation. And in that case, it was the cutting edge present that was destroyed by dynamite, which is like the most banal explosive in the movie world. It was destroyed by basically the tools of the past. Whereas in this case, there's a total inversion of that. We have this old American home that you look at the outside of this house, and I mean, it could be a Levi's ad. It speaks to generations of Americaness, farms and trucks and just, the whole, everything we've built ourselves on. It's the whole American identity, our past and everything. And it's rigged to blow up, and at the end of the film is destroyed by the cutting-edge, near-futuristic atom bomb stuff. So it's an almost complete inversion of the dynamic between the past and the present, and the quasi-futuristic in The Black Cat. And also, in the sister film to this one, in Beyond the Time Barrier, which, as you remember, was the other 1960 science fiction film from Edgar Ulmer, that film is about a man who travels to the future, finds the future. It's like the time machine. It's just occupied by Morlocks. It's a destroyed, dreg kind of dead end society. but he can't go back.
This time
And when you look at that, and you look at the life of Edgar Ulmer, who was a man who left the old world of Europe,
Oh, no, not at all. But I've learned
came to America,
on the balls during the night shift.
saw the quasi-futuristic hope of the
Jim.
glittering film industry, and then was thrown out of it, and lived in the worst areas of LA and stuff in the Depression.
Ready in the lab.
I mean, it's basically the same story. This man traveled through time to another, more modern culture and found that he couldn't find a place in it. And it's that kind of inability to find your place in the world that's at the heart of all of these films. Oh, actually, I realize now that I misspoke earlier. When I said that Faust doesn't have any family ties, that's wrong. Of course, he does. They mentioned that he has a daughter. I must have been listening to myself talk and missed that. But, kind of interesting thing about that, that's actually, he has the exact same deal then that DiCaprio has in Inception, which is another sort of cold procedural film, and that's also the impetus that drove Walter White into crime in Breaking Bad. It was the sense of doing something for his family. This is kind of a very topical thing in the cinema and television of the past 10 years. There's a lot of stuff now about people who do terrible things because they want to get closer with and provide for their families. And this film sort of was on the cutting edge of that, and it's, I think, another reason why this movie needs another look. It's another bit of cold a tension between love for man and the terrible things that'll make you do. That's very contemporary.
Can't get away with this in broad daylight, Joey.
And I think really kind of at the heart of this man's work. And why, in a general sense, I think we need to pay more attention to Edgar Ulmer and pay more attention to the broken-hearted products of Poverty Row, because he was not the only good filmmaker to come out of that. So here we go. We're now 40 minutes into the film, and this is really the first bonding scene between what in any other movie from the era would be the romantic leads. And it looks just like the fighting in the cars in Detour. I mean, it's tense, and he's physically not even present, as well as emotionally them being in different places. You know, there's distance between everybody. All right, here's the centerpiece of the film. This is where it really gets tragic-comic. This is where it inverts the standard of every other Invisible Man movie previously and hence. You go into an Invisible Man movie and you expect it's going to be about a guy who goes crazy because he can't turn visible again. But here you have a man who, at this moment, I mean, he's at his most competent when he's invisible. He's cold and precise, and it's when he's visible again that he becomes nasty. You have a moment now where even though it's a robbery, it's almost the least tense moment in the film. You're not expecting Krenner to start slapping anybody around. You're expecting, like, you know, a little goofy hijinks. And what ends up happening is, as you'll see, because I'm blowing this movie for all of you, in like a minute, his head is going to pop into view in the middle of the bank. And it's funny. It's weird looking, and it looks like a painting from the 60s, you know, an almost surrealist image of just pathetic human anxiety. See, here we go. He's on top of the world. It's a bag. But here he goes, and he doesn't realize yet. Now he realizes he's visible. And look at his face. It's the dopiest, goofiest thing. And this is his first attempt at actualization in the film, and it's an immediate and utter, almost Coen Brothers Fargo-y, idiotic, pathetic failure. Look at, I mean, I was talking before about how there's a sense of anything unusual feels accidental in a movie like this, but I think the ridiculous patheticness of his plight is really the core of these scenes. It's bizarre, isn't it? I don't know many other films that set you up for a robbery like that, and then just pull it out from under you. It really, the only thing, my mind goes to the Coen Brothers and the Coen Brothers' nature. The Coen Brothers' way of looking at fate, which is that, as they said in A Serious Man, you need to just embrace the mystery. There's a sense of a larger pattern, and it's not a comforting thing in the films of the Coen Brothers. It's actually terrifying to be a cog in a larger pattern, and it's the same in Ulmer. It's the same in Detour, when fate puts the finger on him. It's the same even in The Black Cat, before Ulmer's life was destroyed. Where, I mean, that film is about people living in the past, and there's this sense that you can't escape in these movies, particularly this one. You cannot escape. You can have the best plan in the world. You can be the only invisible man on the planet, but if the universe decides it's not with you,
There must be something we can do.
it doesn't matter if you just broke out of prison. It doesn't matter if you're a cold, cold man. If the universe doesn't like you, you're going to turn visible again like an idiot in the middle of a robbery. It's pathetic, and it's a little, I mean, it's overwhelming and freaky, and it's like, you know, it's like French existentialism. And Ulmer has he has a track record of sophistication that he's not quite appreciated for. People look at a movie like this, and if something like that happens, you know, I guarantee you 50,000 people are going to tell me I'm reading too much into this. But Ulmer was a smart, sophisticated man. And he was a man who could appreciate
What are you doing?
You're on your own, baby.
the horror and the comedy of the horror of man's place in the world. And that's really what this film and all his other films, all 48 to however many of them are about, you know. From The Cavern. The Cavern, his last film, his last cinematic statement. So here we go. Now it's another twist of fate, and now it's on her. Now she's the one that the universe temporarily just... It's not working for her. Nothing's working for her. But The Cavern, which was Ulmer's last cinematic statement, at the end of The Cavern, I think it was a big inspiration on Night of the Living Dead. It's about this group of people who are trapped in a cave. And at the end, one of them gets out, and he walks out, and he's wearing an army uniform, and he gets out of the cavern, and somebody in an opposing army uniform sees him and just shoots him, and that's the end of the movie. And it's the same kind of thing. You can fight, and you can fight, and you can fight, but you cannot beat fate in the cinema of Edgar Ulmer. And that crucifix hanging on the wall next to this obvious Ulmer stand-in, I think really speaks to this. That's one of the few blatant bits of production design in this film. I mean, you know, like is small production design. You don't really see a lot of, you know, pictures on walls or whatever. That's really it. And that kind of Catholic guilt kind of pervades the whole film and the whole universe of the film. See right there, at the top of Krenner's game, invisible hand of fate knocks him out from under it. Edgar Ulmer's most famous quote that defined his cinematic style was in an interview with, I think, Peter Bogdanovich, where he said, "I'm looking for absolution for all the things I had to do for money." And I'm really interested in that statement because, on the one hand, it speaks to the darkness of his films and the darkness in the heart of all these characters. I mean, this is a film about everybody in this movie is doing what they're doing against their will, with the possible exception of Krenner. But even he is, I mean, he's working for market forces. He's a pure capitalist. So it speaks to this kind of this sense of doing things against your will that's at the core of Ulmer's work. But it also interests me because Ulmer's work was these films. So when he's saying he's seeking absolution for all the things he had to do for money, I mean, is he talking about Detour? Is he talking about his Yiddish films? Is he talking about The Amazing Transparent Man, which was probably his most absolute and abject failure? And that fascinates me because I think there's a lot of the man
Had to come back.
in the man's work. And I've never really been sure how
Hit the road, it was for your own
proud he was of a lot of the work he did.
good. You had your chance.
So, there's something very tragic about the life of Edgar Ulmer. There's something very basically unfair about the way his career went. But maybe if he was making big movies, maybe it would have been very different. He has one movie in 1947 called Carnegie Hall, and it's one of his few kind of, it's not particularly big budget, but it's big in scale. It's a large movie. It's a little backstage drama about Carnegie Hall, but it's filled up with these long, beautifully filmed performances in Carnegie Hall, classical stuff like Chopin and all that. And he had a real passion for that, and it shows in the film. It's impeccably well done. But outside of the concerts in that film, it's one of his worst movies. It's a really boring, long, loopy kind of film. It doesn't go anywhere. So I wonder maybe if Ulmer had the budgets to get out of his 6-day boot camp style filmmaking. I wonder maybe his movies wouldn't have been as good.
You should think of yours.
You think of Rembrandt painting on his tablecloths, and you think of
Maria deserve what
the Pain Caravaggio and
the kind of world you want for your child.
Fitzgerald Destitute writing The Great Gatsby and all this stuff. And you think maybe if things were cushier for Ulmer, I don't know if he would have had so clear and intense a cinematic vision. And I really love his cinematic vision. There's a power to it that you don't really get in a lot of filmmakers. Now we're nearing the end of the movie. It feels like all the drama was done in a matter of minutes, really. It's a strange kind of pacing, isn't it? You build up, and then suddenly it's a few decisive twists of fate, and it's all done.
Now he has the key.
I like that.
Come, my dear. We must find
I think Psycho, which I keep pointing to as a touchstone on this film, I think they were really tapping into the same thing. I think Psycho operates the same way, and Breathless definitely operates the same way. Breathless is talking, and then suddenly gunfire. And here we go, and these conflicts that they were always there, but they were never. They weren't forefronted for a lot of this film. A lot of this film is, you knew there was animosity between Krenner and her, but it struck me really surprising the first time I saw this, and it still kind of does, to watch that animosity suddenly blow over into murder, accidental as it was. I think that's how the mind of Edgar Ulmer works. I think there's bursts of violence like this. Things just. It's not long fair fights. It's people take beatings. People take beatings in the films of Ulmer, and they get shot suddenly, or they die in the rain in Detour, and you don't know if they were killed with a rock, or they choke on a telephone cord and nobody even realizes it until it's too late, like in Detour. The way Ulmer filmed death I find very fascinating because it's abrupt. And I think death should be filmed, not all the time, because nothing should ever be filmed the same way all the time, but I think there's something to be said for filming death in an abrupt, disruptive manner. When people die in these films, these mid-career, end-career Edgar Ulmer films, they die hard. They die definitively, and she didn't even get last words, and here that sinister-looking little. That's a great piece of production design. It looks like a bomb, doesn't it? That sinister bomb that wasn't a bomb, they're gone. There's no reconciliation. There's no certitude. They're gone. And through the twists of fate, a few people survive. And of course it was the Ulmer stand-in who survived, because Ulmer had a couple more movies to make. But he survives.
Drake and Smith.
Watch when the doctor shows back up again. He's not. There's no
No one enters this area.
pride. There's.
Too much fallout for safety.
He's been through a ringer, and he's as changed as. He's as changed as the dead people. Actually, he's a different human. Okay, this shot right here. Watch this. It cut within the point of view of the binoculars. And on Mystery Science Theater, I can't blame them. They laughed their asses off at that. And everybody still points to this. Every review you'll read of this talks about how the big blooper of the movie is they cut in the binocular point of view. But that's exactly what this movie had been doing from the beginning. That's what he was doing when he was in the attic, and the camera would pull in, and it was a false point of view shot. That's not the binoculars point of view. That is a cinematic lie. Just the same way Godard would lie and Truffaut would lie, and everybody who learned from Ulmer, they learned to let the camera be a character. And here, he's gonna ask a question, and he's gonna look right at the camera, and it's gonna be another one of those moments where it's a little over the top, but it doesn't have the moralizing feel, even though it's literally moralizing, as it would in stuff like Them when they give the end wrap up. He looks at the camera and you don't believe it.
You know, Doctor, this idea of
You don't believe the moral, because you don't believe him looking at the camera, because you do not believe the camera in this movie. If there's one point I want to impress upon you, it's that there are quirks in this movie, and they feel like mistakes, but they add up. And they add up to a consistent vision of a world where you cannot trust. See, there it is. Was he talking to the camera? Was he talking to the cop? Did the camera move in for that? I mean, who was the camera in that shot? They sound like stupid, glib questions, but I think there's a lot that built up in this film to allow it to have an ending that so defiantly and definitively and consistently broke the rules of conventional filmmaking. So thank you for listening. Hopefully I'll do another one of these soon. Let me know if you like it. And please visit shotcontext.blogspot.com for more of me talking about movies.